Hello and welcome back to another episode of CamBro Conversations. Today's conversation, we're talking all things online business, as well as leaving a coveted space at a Big Four accountancy firm. To do so, we are joined by Jonny Watson from Propane Fitness. Jonny, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. Pleasure.
Good to connect on LinkedIn of all places, which is not a place that you spend a lot of time, Jonny, but maybe you would have spent a lot more time if you'd stayed in the accountancy game. You'd be on there more often.
I have two profiles. So I have like the one that still gets poached by recruiters that still think I'm working at KPMG, and then one that I do some propane fitness stuff on. But I'm not a big fan of the platform, to be honest. It's I don't know whether do you get I get constant messages like, hey, have you thought about starting a wine e-commerce business, and have you thought about like, no, obviously I haven't thought about starting a wine e-commerce business, but it's endless. It's endless. So
I'm
yeah, I'm not
enjoying
on
our
there very
pyramid
often.
scheme.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like LinkedIn in my full-time role at the moment is in the insurance industry, and there's a lot of good content on like risk management and whatnot, and you can reach decision makers on there. And I use it for prospecting to speak to finance directors or operation managers, managing directors. But in terms of like as a platform, there's a lot of nonsense on there too. It's kind of going the
Mhm.
way of elements of Instagram where people are just like, oh, I did this good deed today, and they want to tell you all about how fantastic and um,
Yeah.
kind of how much philanthropy they take part in.
Yeah. Or like I started at the bottom of this organization and now I'm at the top, and it's all like rags to riches stories, isn't it? But I guess like, it serves a purpose. It's uh
Yeah,
it's one of many platforms, isn't it?
enabled us to get chatting, so I'm thankful for that, Jonny. And we were discussing before we hit the record button about some of the mutual connections we've got, which is fantastic. And I thoroughly enjoyed your chat with um, David McIntosh, who's a good friend of the show as well. But I think for those that aren't acquainted with you, Jonny, do you want to give us a whirlwind background? I'm sure you're used to doing these by now with your podcast experience over the years.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I guess like as of right now, um, myself and I have a business partner called Yusuf. We run a business called Propane Fitness. We've been doing that for over 10 years now, which always feels weird to say. Um, but I like both of us started life in like not expect or not started life started professional life expect not expecting to do that for a career. So I like did the standard A levels, went to uni, did economics, got the 2-1 that you need to get the grad scheme, did a grad scheme in accountancy, Big Four, um, and literally I guess in terms of like what your listeners want to hear about, like on the first possible day that I could hand my notice in without like technically being still in my training contract, I pressed the resign button, and I've been doing this since then. So that was back in 2016, um, and now it's full time. So we coach a range of stuff. We do fitness, lifestyle, habits, etc. Coaching under the brand name Propane Fitness, and then more recently we've been kind of teaching the inner workings of Propane Fitness to other personal trainers who are like sick of and to be honest, also people who are leaving, like get up to a certain point in 9 to 5 and they think, you know what, I want to do something I want to do, and enjoy doing. And we teach the systems of how to sell expertise, specifically fitness expertise, online. Um, so yeah, that's a like up to date.
Yes, and
What I've been
there's
doing.
there's there's going to be loads and loads within that that we'll go into. Just to touch on the last piece, I know a lot of people have gone through the propane business side of things in recent years, and there's been a huge focus on improving their systems and their funnels and all these unsexy things that nobody really wants to
Mm,
talk about when it comes to running a business. But you guys just seem to be like really consistently good at being in amongst the detail of that, but also then translating that into actionable terms for people to use.
yeah, I think the reason we started the fitness business was like Yusuf and I were annoyed about we felt like we'd been lied to, um, which sounds like the headline for a new thriller, doesn't it? But we thought we'd been lied to by the fitness industry in general. So I think everyone's done like a program or bought a supplement or something that didn't live up to expectations. And then when we left the finance world and started treating this more seriously, and you start looking for like business advice in that world, you realize it's even worse. Um, And a lot of it's unbelievable, to be honest. Like, I always say this: if any of the stuff that gets spoken about in the online fitness world were to be put into like a professional context, you'd walk into the boardroom of a big company and talk and give that advice to those people, like, you wouldn't even, it would just get laughed at. But in the online fitness bubble, it's all seen as advice. So the way I see it is, all we've kind of done is we bring like the how real businesses work, and we try to teach that into the online fitness world, and it's we've been able to help a lot of people, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick Walsh is depending on what my recording schedule looks like next, I've recorded an episode with him, and it was tremendously interesting to talk about some of the principles he's employed from maybe an actual working flow perspective, like you wouldn't think of in terms of being a self-employed entrepreneur. You realize that a lot of people don't actually have the structures to the day to work, but then on the other side, it's the structure in terms of how their business works, and like getting leads from Instagram, Twitter, email list, and actually converting those into long-term paying customers for an online plan, which I find very, very interesting. But one of the main areas that I was keen to talk to you about was your movement from, like you say, that traditional path of got good results at school, hires, A levels, whichever part of the country you come from, you go to a good university, you get the 2-1 to get on the grad scheme, you go through the assessment centers and whatnot, but you've then left that behind to be an entrepreneur. Were you entrepreneurial at school or throughout university?
Uh, I think so. I think I always wanted to. I think everyone's got this thing when they're like at school doing GCSEs, A levels. You have this thought of like, oh, I really want to run my own business, but no one really knows what that means. Or like, I really want to be a investment banker or a hedge fund manager, but no one really knows what that means. Or a stockbroker. I always had that. I never really knew why. I guess like a lot of people, you get a lot of the advice I had at school anyway was, this is the path you're on. This is the road you're taking. But I wasn't like buying sweets and selling them for a profit or anything like that. Like, I didn't really have any. I think my earliest like crack at a business was I tried to do dog walking in a summer holiday, and it just flatlined. I don't think we made a single sale. But the propane fitness thing was our first like real shot at a company, but it didn't start that way. It started out as just something we were interested in. So I think what preceded my entrepreneurial streak was an interest in fitness, through being like really overweight as a kid and finding fitness as like a source of confidence, and that led to realizing like, oh, actually there's a value offering here. Like, we could work with people. But no, not really. I wish I could say like I had multiple businesses when I was younger, but I didn't. This was the first thing that we did that was ever like for profit, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's refreshing though, because I think there is clearly two paths into owning your own business. There is that passion element where you've got a passion for a subject and you look to try and monetize that over the longer term. And then there is just the guy at school, and we all had them, like you say, who could sell sand to the Arabs and was hustling drop shipping at the age of 15 or whatever it was. And I've got friends like that who they were just destined to own multiple businesses, whatever industry, it didn't matter. They just loved that idea. Whereas yourself, you very much got into fitness. I know you're a fairly accomplished powerlifter as well. And that passion for it was like, oh, well, maybe I should do this for a living in terms of helping people. And that was something that you started at university, but still went through with the grad scheme dream, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very well. The At the time when we were leaving university, Propane Fitness wasn't in a position to pay us a salary. And actually, like, one of the reasons, so Yusuf, my business partner, is just finishing a like his full medical degree, so he's in his final year as a junior doctor. And I can remember speaking to him on the phone. I had just started at KPMG. He was a year or two into the job he was doing, and he basically reached the realization before me of like, I'm not doing this. He wasn't contractually bound, so he didn't have to stay for a training contract or anything like that. So he was like, I need something to do. What can I do? Oh, I know. I'll do a medical degree. So that then locked him in for a period of time that he's just coming to the end of. But at that point, so at the kind of early years of us doing this, we had a couple of clients. There was a bit of revenue in the business, but neither of us could have lived off it. I don't really know what I would have done if it had been in that situation. Um, but I'm quite glad, to be honest. I'm quite glad that I went through and got like what I kind of see as a pretty practical qualification, at least as insofar as compared to a degree or A levels or anything like that. And it's always nice to think, well, if things completely fell from under me and failed, I could probably go and be an accountant if I wanted to. That's quite nice. So I'm glad in retrospect, but at the time, it was always a source of frustration. Like every evening and every weekend was spent like trying to build this thing up so that I could leave. Um, but looking back, I think it happened in quite a nice order.
That's interesting. You had Yusuf a couple of years ahead of you in the journey to one as a business partner, but also I've been into this corporate world. I'm not particularly enamored by it. You both have quite similar personality traits, also some very different ones, as anyone that listens to you guys on Life Hacks and Modern Wisdom will know. But I certainly think that having that person ahead of you must have made it hard in some ways for you to go through the training contract. Because I've got friends at KPMG and PwC, the other big four firms, who the workload is quite heavy in terms of amount of study. Although there's other firms I know where they almost all they seem to do is go to the kind of study centers, and they almost don't do any actual client facing
Mm.
work, which I would find really, really boring if I was only working towards my insurance diploma, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Youssef was, I don't know the full details of his job actually, but he wasn't, as far as I understand it, he wasn't in a training contract, so he was able to just leave a bit earlier. I think we reached we both had the conversations of, I don't, this isn't quite what I expected it to be, and but it's difficult because what neither of us know is what it would have been like had propane not existed at all. And I think that was, even chatting to my friends now who I graduated with, got the ACA with. I'm still very good friends with all of them. Some of them still have this inkling of like, I really wish I started something on my own. But I think it's different to think I'd like to at some point and actually have something already in motion. And there's a few experiences that happened along the way that basically made me realize what was possible. And I think when you realize that, like when you have certain, like you hit certain financial milestones, or you hit a certain amount of sales or a certain amount of cash in the business, and then you have to go and do a really long day, as in like, that's hard.
Yeah.
Because then you've got this very stark contrast of, like, I know that my time, even financially, is probably better spent elsewhere. But I've got to keep doing this. I've got to keep ticking the boxes. But yeah, we both reached that realization at the same time. We were just in different like employment situations, I guess.
Of course, equally the exit costs, as you said, from KPMG and other firms are extremely high if you leave before the training contract, up to £10,000 in some instances.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know anybody who chose to leave. Um, we were always told that like you'd have to pay your fees back, which I guess is fair enough, right? Like they do put an awful lot into like investing into you as like an asset of the business, I suppose. So it would make sense that you have to pay at least some of it back, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. How early on? I appreciate you said that Propane wasn't a stage where you would be like, all right, I can pack up and go if you didn't have a training contract. But how early on in the kind of corporate world were you like, I'm not too happy? Obviously, you've had these whispers in your ear from Yusuf that it's not going to be what you want, so maybe you've got a bit of a bias going in.
Um, I think it was about a year in. I think I just realized that I didn't feel like I could see myself doing that for the next 30, 40 years, I suppose. And I think the biggest contrast for me was some of the people that I started working with like, clearly really enjoyed it. Like they felt really good at it. And I was actually just talking to you about this earlier. Like one of the things was at 5 p.m. every day, all I wanted to do was like leave so I could go train, listen to people talking about training, and build the business. And so every kind of minute past 5 was frustration because I felt like, oh, I could be spending this building my own thing. But I knew people who would happily stay till 10 p.m. And that was one of the things for me that I was like, well, okay, if I'm clearly not going to win this game, like if the goal is partner or the goal is CEO or CFO, I'm probably not going to get there through this path. But the thing that I'm happy to work all night on, maybe that's got a shot. So it was, these two things were kind of building it together. I think, it was this growing frustration with not being able to spend more time doing that, and also just the workload increases as you get slightly more senior, as the exams get more serious. The pressure from that builds, and you start to resent it a little bit because it's pulling you away from the thing you do want to do. So those two things combined, I think I decided about 2 years in that I was going to quit when I could, which then made me take the business a lot more seriously. And we invested in marketing and lots of different other pieces of advice.
Yeah, there's lots and lots within that. The first of those is almost we'll break the wall with the listener, and we'll maybe ask them to think about, when you look around within your organization, are you as happy working overtime and pushing the boundaries and maybe doing a little bit extra as those
Yeah.
around you? Because if not, then they're likely, unless they're radically less skilled than you or talented than you, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
outwork you. And I find that interesting, because I know that in my space, I am always delighted to turn off at 5 and go and do my own thing, and maybe do this podcast stuff, go and train. But up until this point, at the age of 28, it's not limited me staying ahead of or staying in line with my peers. However, I do know that if you're looking at really, really far up the tree, like MD level or CEO or like head of branch for like a really large branch in Scotland or England, they will do a lot more hours outside of that. And at the moment, that's not something that really lights my fire. So that's candidly honest with the listener. But I certainly know that you maybe looked around and you thought, God, I'm not really willing to hustle as much as these guys.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at it from the business's perspective, right? Like, if you were in, so the interesting thing is being on the other side of the employment equation. You do look at it as, well, if I'm going to pay this person this amount of money, like, I want something from that, right? I want someone who's going to give me a certain level of commitment in return. And as the paycheck increases, then it makes sense that the commitment increases. And if someone wants to be like, it's a common goal in accountancy, certainly, that people want to reach partner. They want to reach like senior manager, director, partner. Um, it's it doesn't really make sense that role is something that is like 4, 5 chill days a week, and you clock off at 4:30, right? Maybe it is, but in most cases, the people in those positions, they're in charge, and their life and their commitment to the work matches that. And I think it's quite rare that you meet someone like that who's not that fussed.
Yeah.
They're usually pretty passionate about what they're doing. So yeah, I think I just realized that I I didn't I didn't feel as interested in it as a lot of my uh, the group that I was in, the people who were kind of 2, 3 years past or senior to me, who'd already qualified and who were staying on and kind of working up to manager. I just wasn't willing to do what they were doing. Um, so just decided, well, if I can find something that I am willing to work late on, surely it's easier, right? Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Assuming that like the financial rewards are the same anyway.
What were your biggest frustrations within those first 2, 3 years then that were pushing you towards the exit?
Um, Again, it's tricky because the my frustrations were from the perspective of seeing the contrast. So if on a Saturday morning I decided to spend all morning working on Propane and built something or launched something, or like we ran launches for some products, and you see the revenue or you see the success of something, and you see how that impacts the business and the brand, and people give you positive feedback or testimonials, versus doing kind of knowledge work in a framework, in like a matrix style organization and it's all quite hard to put your finger on like what it is you're actually, who it is you're helping, or what it is you're actually doing. Like, yes, I've nailed that spreadsheet, but like until you get a bit more senior, I don't think you really see the bigger picture. I think that was my frustration. It felt very, some of it felt very menial and felt like almost like admin style stuff,
Yeah.
comparably to the other stuff I was doing, which really felt like I was moving this needle and growing this business. So I think that was the frustration. It was the contrast of the two things. Um, but yeah, I mean, I have friends who were there with me who shared the same frustration, but just from the perspective of like, the standard frustration I think any grad has when they leave uni and start, and suddenly you can't do what you want. The kind of
Yeah.
that frustration exists. But for me, it was just a bit more like I could be spending my time elsewhere. I can't.
Yeah, and
You know.
that time elsewhere is more fulfilling for you as well, which I think that's
Yeah.
where if you didn't have propane at all, it would have been a lot more difficult for you to measure whether that was the case.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Whereas I think your peer group, when they're maybe saying they shared the frustrations of, oh, I'm not really that fulfilled by this spreadsheet, or what role do I play within this organization? What does my cog actually do? And I certainly think strangely, I think a lot of my accountancy friends have said that to me. Whereas I've been a lot more in kind of business development sales roles, I know and I can track through things like Salesforce and CRM, like and my funnel and whatnot, how far I'm moving the needle forward. It's a lot more
Hmm.
measurable. Whereas I
Yeah.
guess some of my friends in other industries have found that a lot more challenging. Again, I think it comes down to industry as well as the actual world.
Yeah. I mean, I was in external audit, so the stereotype's largely true. Like a client doesn't really want you to be there. Like a lot of the time, you're a frustration for the client. Um, and there's obviously a lot of work to do, and you're up against deadlines internally and externally, and there's often not that much time to do something. So it can be difficult to find like really deep fulfillment in that kind of situation when you're speaking to a client who's just you're just someone else on their to-do list, and like they're already busy, and then you're there asking for more stuff that's not part of their normal job, and telling them they're doing stuff wrong, right? And then your boss is chasing you for work that was supposed to be due last week, but you were waiting on a client, and the whole thing kind of snowballs a little bit sometimes. Um, so yeah, it. I think for me it was just a perfect storm of stuff. I had this like other thing that was progressing that didn't feel like that. In fact, it felt like the opposite. And the day to day of working was increasingly getting more like that as I became slightly more senior and as the exams intensified.
Yeah. As that kind of period intensified, did you find it dulled your creativity in the propane space, or were you always able to draw firm lines between the two?
Yeah, to be honest, there'd be days where you don't get home till 9, 10 o'clock. It's pretty hard to be creative after a day of that, especially if you've got revision and stuff to do. So it did start to have an impact. Um, and that does make you think like, am I ever going to be able to devote enough time to this to get it to the point where, because obviously the more senior you get, um, the bigger the salary is that you're forgoing, and like the more of the progression that you can kind of see that you're forgoing. So you worry like, can I keep this in pace with? Could I leave and take the same income? That starts to creep into your mind as well. So yeah, it definitely did have an impact. If I had been able to quit earlier, I think the business would have grown faster. But what can you do? Like I didn't fancy the fees and the battle with whoever it is, HR or whatever.
Yeah, of course. I think for me, it's interesting that leaving before you had too many sunk costs was quite valuable versus if you'd maybe kept going for a little bit longer, maybe the carrot of manager, the carrot of partner was dangled a bit more. It becomes harder and harder to leave as you go through that. So, I
Mm.
mean, the ideal world, you're in a situation where you don't have a training contract, you don't have 2 to 3 years that you absolutely mandatory need to see out or face the financial consequences when you've probably already got student loan debt and whatnot. But
Hmm.
the ideal world is that you have your business ready and from the end of university, if you've gone down that traditional route, and you're kind of able to jump ship before it kind of intensifies too much.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're lucky that it played out in that way. But I know plenty of people, and like we work with people who are building something in the evenings, weekends, or even kind of take the view of like I'm going to save up X amount of time and then just going to jump. But it's it's difficult, especially when you've spent basically your entire professional life building up to this point, or like since school building up to the point of getting this job, and then you're gonna throw it away. Um, so yeah,
You're on the
it's
traditional
it's
path that a lot of people would look at as successful at the age of 23, 24. And so
mhm.
some people would maybe question whether that was the right move. But like you say, if your passion lies elsewhere, if you it doesn't light your fire in the same way that it lights your colleagues' fire, then and also if you're looking up, as you said, to 2, 3 years senior, and you're like, I don't really want to do what they're doing, then
Yeah,
why would you
yeah,
ever hang around? So you took the jump. You've gone all into propane. Do you remember what the moment was like when you handed in that resignation? What came immediately after it?
Yeah, I do. So I I was basically I was like living with my girlfriend. I'd said to her, who I'd met her at KPMG, still with her now. But she, uh, when I said I was coming on this podcast, actually, she asked me whether I was going to mention this story. So it's she knows what I'm going to say. But I basically said to her beforehand, like, I think I'm going to hand my notice in. What do you reckon? And she was just like, yeah. And I was like, that's a pretty big decision. Like, have you not got anything else to say? She's like, yeah, I'll be fine. And then she went and got in the shower, and so I just had to sit there, like, because the way I handed my notice in was there was literally a form to fill in and a button, and once you press the button, like that was it. You kind of submitted your. So she was just so blasé about it. It made me think, yeah, actually, yeah, it's not a big deal. So I just filled this form in, pressed it, and I had the moment of like, what did I just do? Um, and then pretty much everybody I told had a different reaction. So all of my friends that I worked with were all like, "Oh man, that was awesome! Like, well done for doing that." Because I think there was a little bit of like, I wish I had something else to go to. My parents thought it was a mistake. Uh, Certainly, like the managers and the people I worked with thought it was a mistake, and just didn't really understand what I was doing. So I had a full range of reactions, um, which when you're not, like, honestly, I'd love to say I quit and I was like 100% sure and
Yeah.
had no doubt about it. Like I was full of worry and doubt because like, you do think I probably can't just go back there now. If this fails, I'm going to look stupid and all that sort of stuff. Um, but that just fuels the like, right, like, better get cracking. Um, so that which helped. So I had everything from my girlfriend just thinking no big deal, through to my parents thinking I've like thrown my career away, um, through to friends who thought it was an awesome decision. And then I was just sat with my laptop on my own, had to make something of it.
Yeah, that's that's incredible, the spectrum of reactions. And I suppose some of those will be more favorable than others. And I think parents are naturally, regardless of where they
Yeah,
lie politically, they're conservative with a small c in terms of they'd probably be quite
definitely.
pleased. Oh, he's got his 2-1, he's at KPMG,
Yeah.
he can have a great pension, he'll be able to look after us in our retirement as well. And he'll be
Mm.
able to have a nice family with this nice girlfriend who's met who also works in an accountancy firm. Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Ticks all the boxes.
But to go against that is obviously brave. And I guess maybe your girlfriend's reaction maybe came from seeing how much work you were putting in behind the scenes, whereas I don't think anyone else maybe sees that unless they
Yeah,
live with you.
I think so. So like she knew more about what we were doing. I suppose like aside from Yusuf, she'll have known the most about what was going on in the business and the revenues and all that sort of stuff. So I think she knew it wasn't just totally winging it. I think she also knew how unhappy I was in the job. Um, so she was aware that like it was the right thing and probably was, the direction I've been going in for quite some time. But even though someone else sees that, you don't always see it yourself. There's always that doubt because quitting your job. I think is a pretty big decision, and it's quite hard to go back on once you've done it. So yeah, I think you're right that my parents are more on side now, um, but it is just being your own boss is inherently risky. You're going from a very very safe career that's supposedly like recession proof industry through to um, like anything could happen. What even is online fitness? No one really knows.
Well,
Um,
2016 as well, Johnny, online fitness was considerably less developed than now, whereas I think a lot of people would maybe be like, oh, yeah, yeah, I've seen, like maybe even particularly more so after the pandemic, oh, I've seen Joe Wicks taking online Zoom classes.
yeah,
Is that what you're going to do, Johnny? And you're like, well, no, not really. I'm actually
not really, but yeah.
around the programming rather than actual jumping
Hmm.
around for people on a screen. But I certainly think it'd be maybe a bit more of a understandable choice now. However, I think most parents would still very much be like, "Are you sure, son? Is this what you want to
Hmm.
do?" You come across as very rational though, and I think maybe that comes across in the way that you speak and the way that you put forward your ideas and how you've gone through this process. But was there a feeling that this had to match up money wise? So, for example, for argument's sake, £30,000 KPMG salary I need to be making £30,000 income from propane before I jump?
Uh, so not in the short term. So I guess like, so I did take a pay cut when I left. Um, but I think I saw it as like taking a what felt like a considered gamble. Um, so there was two things that happened in the like 6 months prior to handing my notice in that were big. Like it was a bit of a paradigm shift, I suppose, in what I thought was possible. So I think the route that you when you go down the standard route of um, 2-1 grad job, finance, big four, you just assume the world like progresses in a certain way. So I'll get promoted, and I'll get a pay rise, and I'll get this promotion, I'll get this pay rise, and maybe if everything goes well, I might earn this, right? And you kind of have these numbers and this construct of what's possible, and you also think, well, I'm not going to earn this in 2 years' time. That would be ridiculous, right? You have all these kind of like subconscious biases around what is and isn't possible, and I listened to a podcast with a guy called John Romanello. I don't know whether you've heard of him before. Um, he's a pretty big guy in fitness at the time. He wrote for T Nation and bodybuilding.com. He's in men's health. We've had him on the podcast a couple of times. Actually, I confronted him about this, how he caused me to lose my job. But he was one of the first online fitness coaches. And he was being interviewed for the first time about the revenue of the business that he was running. And I was like listening to it. I was driving to work at the time, just sort of like listening to it in the background until he started talking about the numbers. And the first launch he did generated like, so this is a launch of just for context of people listening, this is selling a PDF with pretty basic fitness information in. Like, it sounds like I'm being condescending to John's work. It's a very good product, but physically speaking, that is what it is. And it was well over 1 million in a single weekend of a launch in turnover. So I listened to that and I was like, that's quite a bit more than I expected would be possible in the online fitness world. And then shortly after that, a guy that I know fairly well did a launch of an online product, and I saw how he was kind of prepping for it. He wasn't putting that much work into it. And he did, I think he made 70 grand in a day or something like that. So these kind of things happened where you're like, hold on, like in those two cases, like that's more than like my boss's boss made in a year. Maybe it's possible for this sort of business to do a lot more than I might earn if I kind of progress my way up through. So it was that kind of gamble. I wasn't really looking at it as like, can I match today? It was, what if I could accelerate the rate of what would be possible if I kind of stay in the traditional career? But there's a lot of unknowns in that, obviously. You know, I didn't really know, aside from a few people who were vaguely involved. You can't turn to a friend who's doing it too and ask them. At least you couldn't back then. So it was those couple of experiences matched with like a little bit of trying to forecast it from the clients we had and what I thought might be possible. And I thought, well, if I just give it a year and see, then I could probably go back to something accountancy based if I need to. So it was that kind of decision. It wasn't like the business must be at X for me to leave. Like I could take a pay cut and still live and still be okay, which I did for a while. So that was the like slightly irrational, slightly knee-jerk emotional reaction, but it was a bit of a gamble, to be honest.
Yeah, it sounds knee jerk for you, Jonny, but given you've crunched the numbers to still be able to live comfortably, I think there was some sensible maths behind it all. And
well, you're still an accountant at the end of the day, aren't you? So it's an accountant's knee jerk emotional reaction is not quite the same as someone else's.
Yeah, for sure. And what my question off the back of that is, you say you've still got those accountancy tendencies. What skills from your accountancy qualification have you taken into propane?
I think like having an understanding of, it sounds silly, but like having an understanding of like basic business does help. Having an understanding of like what a set of accounts mean, and how a business is run and the numbers and how, the difference between revenue and gross profit and all those sorts of things. You don't need an ACA to figure that stuff out, but that does help. I think in doing the ACA and doing the training, the thing that I think is like, to be honest, I'm not sure where else you could get the exposure to it, is actually when you're auditing a business in some cases, some pretty big businesses, and you see how they work, and you see the internal systems, and you see the processes, and you realize how important certain aspects are, and how important certain systems are, and how meticulous things are to run at a certain volume. You see that, and you realize that, okay, these businesses are big for a reason, right? There's a lot of thought goes into everything that happens. Getting exposure to multiple industries, seeing how they run, seeing how they work, that helped a lot. And I think that drove the very, like as you mentioned at the start, the very kind of systems focus that we have. That comes from seeing how real businesses run. And that's kind of my critique with the advice that's given to a lot of personal trainers who are trying to grow is it's very much like, oh, just post on Instagram, mate. That'll work. Which is fine at a small level, but like there's no business in the world that is big there's just the CEO, just like Jeff Bezos isn't winging it on Instagram. You know, there's strategies in place. So that's probably, while that's not an accountancy skill per se, I think part of the training helped immensely, getting exposure to that. So yeah, for that part of it and for the skills side of it, immensely grateful for the qualification, for the training.
Seeing under the hood of big successful businesses and what makes them tick, as you say, is something that you've clearly brought to the Propane business side of things, where you're coaching online coaches and personal trainers to make money, because you're bringing an element of professionalism, which, as you say, it's in an industry where if you took the approach that many do, you'd be laughed out of town in almost any other any other sector. So that's certainly interesting when it comes to like almost that corporate induction that you try and take across into space that is pretty cowboy in its nature in some regard. Definitely improving, but certainly still has many problems within it. So that's interesting you took that across. One of the other areas that you're very well known for, Jonny, whether you like it or not, is life hacks and productivity. Although you occasionally get hot potatoed, I think the phrase is, you still bring a lot of value to those episodes. My question, I think, to try and frame this a little bit differently to something you might have been asked before, is if you were somebody that was still working in a corporate job, what maybe life hacks or productivity things do you think they could introduce, particularly given that things have definitely changed from when you maybe had to go into KPMG in a suit and sit for 9 to 5 as a minimum, and you got daggers glared at you if you were to leave at 1 minute past 5 to go and get under a heavy barbell?
I think it might even have been the first life hack of all of the life hacks, and I think it was from Yusuf, which is having a capture process and having a well organized task management system. So the thing I found hardest from going from uni into KPMG was you go from basically having a single focus, which is like, I have my exams to pass, right? Like I have to just pass my exams and get out of uni with my 2-1, and then I'm in the real world. And then suddenly you have all that to do on top of multiple clients, multiple deadlines, lots of things. And if you drop a ball, there's actually consequences to that. You know, like deadlines get missed, you get penalized, I suppose, in whatever way that manifests in a corporate way. So just having ways of capturing information. You know, if someone says something to you, like, oh, will you make sure this is done by this? And you go, oh yeah, I'll just remember. Like eventually that system fails, right? Eventually you forget, everyone forgets. And I didn't really have that when I was there. Like I had like paper to-do lists, and I'd kind of keep what I was doing on a Word document or whatever. But having some proper software that you really trust, that you can just put everything into, and you know that it'll remind you when you need to be reminded of something, and you won't forget stuff, I think allows you to be more just agile in what you're doing. You know, if you're doing something, you know it's the right thing to be doing at that time, not I did have that thing. Oh yeah, oh god, I have that thing that's due tomorrow. If you try and react like that and interact like that in a very dynamic environment, it just adds to the stress levels, which decreases your enjoyment of it. So I think you might have heard Yusuf and I argue about this. I use something called OmniFocus because it's better. Yusuf uses Tick and he thinks that's better. I think Chris is using OmniFocus. We talk about this sort of stuff a lot on Life Hacks. But I would get some software like that to put stuff in, make sure you're fully on top of everything, and you've got reminders and notifications and things set up so that you're most likely giving yourself the best chance, basically, on being productive.
I'm always really surprised when my friends who, like me, work a corporate job, but unlike me, don't do the kind of stuff on the side. They don't
Mm-hmm.
use tools like that at all. They think that's almost exclusive to the online world or the kind of entrepreneurial world. And I'm thinking, well, no, because if I can be as efficient as some of my friends that run businesses or the people that I listen to online that inspire me in a positive way, then I can actually get a lot more done within my 9 to 5. That means I can log off at 5 and then go and train and record a podcast with you or whatever else I've got going on. And
Yeah.
I've found that one of the competitive advantages you can give yourself in the workplace is being hyper organized like that. So I'm glad that that was one of the first life hacks you brought to board, because there are people running around with, like, I do like a written to-do list, but there's definitely a lot more to it when it comes to keeping yourself in check and keeping on point. Equally, one of the things I've been talking to my email list a lot about is we are always bombarded with, oh, do you meditate? Do you take cold showers? Do you have a gratitude journal? Do you go for a morning walk, or whatever else? Do you pat your tummy and rub your head at the same time? Whatever else you're up to. And that's fantastic. But I've been talking a bit about subtraction. So if you were thinking about people still in the corporate world and some of the things that you've learned from working for yourself as well, what do you think they should take away or subtract from their day to day?
It's interesting because it's something that we've been, like, as a business, doing a lot of over the last year, is stripping stuff away. And I personally, I've gone from having a really elongated morning routine to basically just meditating. I think something that I wish I'd done more of, that I do now, is I try and match my day to kind of when I think there's an asymmetric advantage to doing that thing at that time. So, for example, I used to try and train in the morning because I thought the morning training was a good thing. I used to wake up and meditate, all the stuff you talked about. Like, I'd spend the first like hour and a half doing stuff that I couldn't really say was doing anything, but if like Joe Rogan said that I should do it, then I should be doing it, right? So, whereas I found if I just wake up and within half an hour I'm working, I'll get way more out of that hour or those 2 hours than if I would move those hours and do them at the end of the day. So I would say subtract and say, well, everything that I'm doing that I'm trying to improve myself, like, is it actually doing anything? Is it working? Something like meditation, you can't necessarily feel it at the time. There's an awful lot of research behind it. And I do think do it for long enough, you do feel the benefits. So I take the like 80-20 approach to it. So how can I keep the fewest things in while still getting the benefit? And then how do I get the most out of the hours that I spend? So if I train at the end of the day, I'm able to do that because I shifted my work forward. I get more done in the hours that I do work. I'm able to finish earlier and train in the evening where my sessions are better, where the quality is better, where I can lift more weight and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't really give any thought to that. I suppose from what I understand, and as you mentioned, the people who work there now, there's more flexibility in kind of when you work and where you work. So I think if I had the latitude to do that, I would put more time into thinking, well, when am I best working? Like, when do I get the most focus? When am I most distracted? When it makes the most sense to take breaks? And I think you get more out of that than spending a lot of time doing habits and morning routine. Personally, anyway, that's kind of what I've arrived at.
Yeah. I got a message off the back of one of those posts, and somebody was saying, oh, we're going back to the office as of next Monday. And I was like, okay, fantastic. And he was like, but I've been doing like an hour morning walk, 10 minutes journaling, 15 minutes kind of ROM WOD mobility routine, and I meditate as well. What should I strip back? And it was similar to what you've said there in terms of try and keep in what gives you the most bang for your buck, and be conscious of when your kind of peak performance is. And for many people, it is first thing in the morning. I know I do like a longer walk in the morning because it's kind of the only time that I know I can get 5,000-6,000 steps if I'm working towards 10, 12, whatever I'm aiming for. But I also know that when I get back and I get into workflow, that's when I'm at my most productive. And if I fall down the black hole of Instagram at that point or something else, I know that later on in the day, I'm going to be chasing my tail because of that. So I find that really interesting that you've used that kind of awareness of when is my peak performance and cutting down maybe some of the things that you can maybe end up doing later on the day, because nobody says that you need to necessarily write your gratitude or do your meditation or go walk at a particular time of the day, or just nobody says you need to do it
Absolutely.
at all if it doesn't serve you.
Yeah, and I think the example I always use when we're discussing this with clients is like, try taking the hardest thing, like the hardest work task that you're going to do all day, and doing it first thing in the morning or last thing at night, and the difference, but the effort required and the time required, and then imagine moving your meditation session, and it's like, oh well, it would be fine, you know. So if you take the first hour or the first couple of hours of your day, and that time is spent not on your highest output tasks, all you're really doing is just robbing yourself of like wasted time throughout the day. But I definitely think um, like appraising something by taking it away. So if you do already have a complex routine, just take things away one at a time and see what happens. Because the stuff that really has an impact is the stuff that you take it away and you're like, oh wow, I need to add that back in again. If everything's just always additive, then it might be that it's just the walk that makes you feel better. But then it's the wrong one. Oh no, it's the cold shower. When you're doing so many things, it's hard to attribute what's working. So I'd take them away one at a time, or even all of them, and then add them back in one by one, or something like that. But usually, I think fewer things is better because you're going to be more consistent and you put more focus into the things that you're doing.
I think it means as well, particularly, I hate the term when life's back to normal, but when things are a little bit more fluid and I'm traveling to business meetings and maybe I'm staying overnight in Leeds or Liverpool, I love the fact that I'm not reliant on being in the perfect environment and going through the full routine before my 9 o'clock meeting. That means that I don't feel I can perform or deliver. I'm
Yeah,
sure you know what I mean there,
definitely.
Johnny. Like you
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
you need to be in a position where, all right, okay, well, I've not got access to my foam roller, or I've not got access to a particular thing that I normally like to do, or I can't have my water at the perfect temperature with the right amount of lemon in it or something like that. And it doesn't destroy everything. Because I think some people are, if you go from like a full morning routine to absolutely nothing, maybe on the weekends, no wonder your Saturday is spent absolutely terribly. Whereas if I've got like a minimal viable, I won't use product, but a minimal viable output on my morning routine on a Saturday, that means that I still have a pretty good day. Then
Mm.
that's healthier longer term.
I think I spend quite a lot of time listening to interviews with like CEOs of big businesses because there's just, I think even over podcasts or audiobooks and stuff like that, hearing them answer questions about how they deal with things, there's always stuff to be learned from like guys at the men and women at the top of what they're doing. Um, and the thing that I always come back to when it comes to morning routines is like whenever Jeff Bezos gets asked about him, think what you want, whether he's good or bad. He's done all right. He's got quite a lot to manage. He just talks about 8 hours of sleep, like absolute priority. Gets enough sleep, and I think he then wakes up and like makes pancakes with his kids and starts work at 10. And there was something he described in an interview where he's saying he just has to make like, I think it was 10 or something really high quality decisions every day. And if he can bring the best version of him to making those decisions, that's a really productive day for him. But it all hinges on like getting enough sleep, being well rested, being in the right frame of mind. And if he'd woken up at 5 a.m. to do his journaling, and does that bring a better version of him to work? Probably not. So it is interesting when you hear there's like the productivity world, and I think a lot of people who are in that world and doing this stuff are doing it to try and improve their career, improve their effectiveness at work, or build a business or whatever. And then when you hear the people who are actually at the top of that game, it's pretty rare that they're doing this stuff, and actually they're focused on the stuff that's like really impactful, and really moves the needle, like getting 8 hours of sleep, for example. So yeah, I think being more minimalist with this stuff means that you're more flexible with it. Like if all you're doing is meditating, all you need is your phone, or even nothing, if you don't even track what you're doing, which means you can always be consistent with it and always have the same routine, which I think is the most important thing, really.
Yeah, it's really important that we have these conversations, and I think it's why people like yourself, Yusuf, and Chris are so popular with people in my demographic and age group, where you guys have been at the coalface. You've maybe tried a lot of these different things. It's one of the reasons I get a lot of questions on Instagram about morning routines and whatnot, because I have kind of dabbled and dialed it up and down based on what's effective. And I think some people would do well to be a bit more minimalistic about it rather than hoping to go from 0 to 100 in that respect. You mentioned CEOs and leaders of big businesses, and we're going to class Propane in that because I'm interested that you and Yusuf have worked together for 10 years, you've said, and that's an incredibly long time to be in partnership. So the last area I wanted to cover with you, Jonny, was just around why do you think you two work so well together and have been a continued success?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a few times, and I'm never really sure what to say because I don't know. Is the honest answer. But it was put to me that we were on an interview where someone said, most romantic relationships don't last 10 years, and you guys are you guys have been in business together for 10 years. I think that probably two things. I think one, we have skill sets that complement each other, and we're not both trying to do the same thing all the time in Propane. So we definitely have areas of expertise and competence, and it just so happens that they fit very well together and allow us to run all the systems and everything in the business. I don't think, and I'll be jinxing this, but in the 10 years we've been running the business, we've never had a fallout or an argument, or neither of us have been upset with the other. And I think that it sounds so cliche, but if I think something, if he thinks something, we do just say it to the other person, and there is a line in the sand of this is work, and then if we go out for dinner, that's not work.
Yeah.
And so there's almost like a separate identity. But I think we've been involved in business projects with other people before, and whenever I work with someone else in a business context, I always appreciate Yusuf, because you'll say something to someone and you'll say something that's just a fact, and they'll get offended by it. You're like, oh God, I don't even know what I said. I thought I just read that thing out, and they're offended by it. So I think just having a culture of you can say whatever you want, and no one's going to take it personally because it's all just the business, has allowed us to emotionally stay out of the way, and not let my feelings and his feelings impact the company, and I think that allows us to keep working together. But it might also be any other. I don't know. That's what I would guess.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
We'll go with that, Jonny. Considering you're friends as well, it's remarkable that you're able to separate those two kind of different areas in terms of we can go out for dinner as friends, but then when we go back to the flat or we're having a conversation, we're talking shop and we're talking business, and you're able not to blur the lines between the two, and I think that says a lot for your ability to last as a partnership. That's something you find achievable.
Yeah, I think we just have so many other shared interests, luckily, that it's easy to talk about other stuff. If anything, it's quite nice to say, right, no business talk this evening, because we get to talk about so all the productivity stuff that we're always reading about, all the podcasts we're reading, all the books we're reading, meditation, training, nutrition, all these things that it's kind of like work, but it's also not. And we could talk about that for when me, Yusuf, and Chris go out for dinner, it's we're there till midnight talking about the weirdest stuff, that's all not work. So that's always, I think if we didn't have that, because you'd sometimes get it with work colleagues where you go out for a work social and all that gets spoken about is work, because the commonality there is work. We have work in common, but we also have 10 other things that become the conversation. So I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, very healthy. And I think if anyone's thinking about going into business with somebody else, then those are considerations that they can take forward as well as all the other things that we've covered in this episode, Jonny, around making the move away from that traditional path and having a rational, but also kind of realistic dreamer's expectation of what is possible within that. I think I found that incredibly interesting from my own standpoint, but I'm sure the listeners have as well. If those want to connect with you off the back of this, Jonny, where should they head towards?
So the two places are for the fitness side of what we do, it is propanefitness.com. For the business side of what we do, it is propane-business.com. We couldn't get the URL without the dash because the propane business in the US is quite a big deal, it seems. So yeah, those two places. So for the business mentoring or kind of the systems of how the business works, propane-business, fitness stuff, macros, fat loss, muscle gain, propanefitness.com.
those are the places to go. And I know you're not a huge social media advocate, Jonny, but I'm sure if people will want to join me and they connect with you on LinkedIn at Jonny Watson, and hopefully the right one, not the one where you're
Not the KPMG one.
yeah, you're being headhunted for another accountancy role despite being inactive for 5 years in the space. But I've thoroughly enjoyed that, Jonny. Thanks very much for coming on. Listeners, if you've enjoyed this and you think it's something you want to share with somebody else in the corporate world who's teetering on the brink, or maybe there's somebody that's really fulfilled in the corporate world and you just want to share with them a different perspective, then please ping the link onto them and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.